Delighted to have our panel members join us now. We mentioned the target, 85% of UK premises to have gigabit broadband by 2025. I think we heard earlier, we're actually making reasonably good progress towards that. I looked at Think Broadband this morning, they're saying 58% now gigabit and 28%, it's just tipped over the 28% level, now full fibre. So, you know, on that trajectory, we're sort of well on the way, I think, to the target. But let me just ask each of the panel members just to introduce themselves, and also, what in that introduction, could you tell me what you see as the main barrier in getting not just to the 85% target, but in fact the 100% target that we probably all want to get to? Rob, do you want to start off?
Hi, I'm Rob Burles. I'm head of regulation at Swish Fibre. I used to work for Henry, but I can say what I like now because he doesn't write my report or decide any bonus I get. So, look, I mean, from the perspective of having moved from DCMS to the sector, I think if you'd have said to us when we were writing the FTIR in 2018 that we'd be in this position at this time, we'd have been delighted. I think there is some discontent amongst the sector about some of the decisions that have been made over time, whether it's the WFTMR, whether it's the Equinox decision, some of the difficulties with the OMR and public review process. So I think we just need to make sure that we're not taken for granted by government and that they don't get complacent and that they do take account of our concerns. But in general, I think that the main challenge is that whole one for BDUK of, you know, how do you square a really dynamic sector that's building really, really fast with trying to intervene in a way that doesn't affect commercial appetite and investor build? And that's the big thing for Henry and BDUK, I think.
Hi everyone. I'm actually sitting in for Catherine Collins, which is slightly ironic, being that she was kind of my main competitor, probably in my City Fibre days. For those that knew me from a couple of years ago, I was kind of co-founded City Fibre, so I've been in this space for some time. I just want to actually go back and start by saying, you know, when I entered this when founding City Fibre in 2011, we were in a very, very different position. We were in a position then where infrastructure competition was almost deemed to have failed. The Ofcom had moved to an environment of service competition, and a service competition model which was kind of driving Openreach down to almost like lowest cost. And almost the challenge then was just trying to find space in the market and find economic space to actually build alternative infrastructure was actually very, very challenging. And I think everyone thought that you know, the altnets, first wave of altnets coming in the market at that time were crazy. It was impossible to do what we do. So the fact that we're here today, I think, actually has a lot to do that we've moved the market substantially. I think through the FTIR, through the strategic review from Ofcom, we've moved to an environment which has encouraged phenomenal amounts of competition now, and I think we should all be very, very pleased with that, very proud of that. Key thing then is how do we make that sustainable? We need a sustainable competition model to ensure that we can, you know, roll out these networks, deliver them, and build economic value in those networks for the investors, and so on. And if we can do that, and we can do that together, then I think we can, you know, we should be on a good way to get to those kind of targets, you know, quite quickly. So I'm taking a slightly different kind of perspective, kind of on that. I think there's some risk areas, and therefore some areas I think that government, and from a policy perspective, from a regulatory perspective, they need to understand some of those risks. In moving to an infrastructure competition model, we have, and we're seeing some signs now that there is, you know, some potential interest from, say, Virgin Media that might be interested in opening up their network. That sparks a media commentary already from its, you know, from Openreach that might start a bit of a price war there. And the models we've had, certainly from a regulatory model, looks at putting, systems in place which kind of protect consumers from excessive pricing. Move now to get to a position of having pricing which kind of encourages investment, which is a much better position to be. But there still needs to be some thoughts, I think, that around how would government, how would the regulator react to a potential price war between two big players in the market, which actually could drive pricing and wholesale pricing down very low too quickly, and make therefore sustainable competition for a lot of alternets, certainly as you move into the areas where network build is more expensive, sustainable. So that's, I think, a word of caution and a word of warning kind of for the future. But I think overall we should be pleased that's going to work towards that sustainable competition model.
Hi, everyone. My name is Cordia Liu. I work for Huawei UK as Head of Regulatory Affairs. So it's very encouraging to hear that in the UK, the gigabit coverage has reached 58% now. However, comparing with other EU countries, I think UK is still lagging behind in terms of full fiber coverage. And I think this is very challenging, and also the 100% gigabit target actually should remain, given how critical it is for the UK citizens to have a reliable connectivity, high-speed connectivity. And also it's critical for the economic recovery post-COVID. So in terms to be able to do that, it's very important to have a industry collaboration. So if we look at the successful story from Spain, actually part of the success is come from the competitive market. They have a competitive service provider, and I think that contribute a lot to their rapid development of full fiber network. And according to the National Audit Office's report, to be able to achieve the gigabit target, at least fourfold time delivery rate should be achieved to deliver the 100% gigabit target. And to be able to do that, it has to be have a competitive market, both in terms of service provider and supply chain. And I think the important thing is the industry should work together.
Thanks, Claudia. Alex?
So Mark has said most of what I would have said. So this is very much like the old days. But I would make a couple of comments. So obviously echo the thought that we are in a transformationally different place than where we were even 2 or 3 years ago. And a lot of that, in my view, a lot of credit for that goes to very clear leadership from the government, not least Henry and his team, which included Rob for a long time. So take a bow, guys, because I think there has been a real, fundamental shift, and language matters, and the really positive language that we've had, I think, has inspired all of us to step up. If I think about the risks now around execution, I really see them in 2 parts. The first is really picks up a theme that Tim has already, discussed in the fireside chat with Henry, which is, I agree with Henry that competitive intensity and challenge is kind of going to be critical to actually execution. I fear, and I have to say that my fear has not particularly been allayed by Dave's earlier presentation of Ofcom's position, is that an element of complacency has crept in on the regulatory side of this around what needs to be done to nurture and sustain competition through this critical phase. Competition is not just for Christmas. Oh, that's dogs, sorry. Anyway, but the point is well made, that we are, you cannot execute a handbrake turn-on policy, as we have done, away from services competition to infrastructure competition, make a single statement of intent, which is all the WFTMR is, and then expect that magically to transform itself into sustainable competition on the ground. And at the moment, there are a number of big looming challenges around the execution of regulatory decisions, which to my mind are starting to inject risk which need not be there into our business models and our business plans. So that's my first and most important point. Second thing is a bit more actually in kind of Henry's territory and a bit more in his gift, I suppose, or the government's wider gift. Conversations today have revealed that we are all concerned about the sort of, the bottleneck that is going to happen, particularly as we move towards the intermediate target around resources, skills, labour. We're already all seeing the consequences of this. And there are some obvious mitigations which are not available to us. So the government's not going to suddenly change its policy on, for instance, migration rules. I get that. But I do think we need to be doing more on things like across our industry, but also with the government's help to fix things like the pipeline of UK domiciled workers coming into our industry, the skills and training required to create meaningful careers for them. And I think we also need to ensure, and this is where actually there is a link back to the kind of competition model, that we're not all fighting each other on the ground in an absolute free-for-all, where we ourselves, our behaviour is actually driving up those input costs and creating those bottlenecks. So that brings us right back round to the question of, is it really sensible? We may not be able to do anything about Openreach's behaviour, but we at least need to be mindful of how we can work together more effectively and collaborate to manage those risks and to avoid actually ending up at war with each other for resources. So I think those are probably my two main points. I've got probably a dozen others, but I'll leave it there.
Is this one working? Yeah, thanks. So quite a lot of content in there. Thank you, panel. Let me just pick up on a few bits I scribbled down, and perhaps Henry, you can just share your thoughts on them. So that was quite an interesting point, I think, by Mark on making sure the market actually does remain sustainable, and there isn't, between two big players, some massive wholesale bun fight that actually ends up reducing competition. Any thoughts on that, and any thoughts on how, as it's quite a complex one?
I think on the specifics and kind of speculating about future states of the world and regulation, I will pass on, as it's not really, in terms of regulation of the market, is not for me, it's for Ofcom. What I would say is, and what we were pretty blunt on actually in our statement of strategic priorities for the regulator, was that they should be focusing on creating an environment that promotes investment and promotes competition. And I think, in fact, it might have been Rob who wrote the sentence actually when he was still in my team on this, which is about not to focus on further price reductions actually on that. So that just remains government steer in this space. How it would actually play out in reality, like I say, I will pass on.
I guess my follow-up question to that would be is, how are you measuring your strategic priority, and when do we see those measurements start to be made public?
So Ofcom have to give regard to the SSP in all of the decision making they have on the sector, and they report it as part of their annual report, which is kind of the process approach for showing how they are taking those things into account. I think at the moment, I know that, some of the people on the panel and other discussions have, had their views on some things about WFTMR, but it feels like there has been an awful lot of investment in the sector, and from a huge number of operators. So it looks like both, it's very nice to get the warm praise off Mark in terms of, and Alex on the government's position, but it feels like that overarching strategy and goal that we set out a few years ago is working. I think, when I started really working in telecoms about 4 years ago, we wouldn't have had this many people in the room at a conference, all with an interest in building networks. We wouldn't have had, the billions of pounds from both kind of the obvious incumbents and then the new entrants into the market. So I think actually, if I was to give an assessment of where we are with it, I would say positive. I agree with the rest of the panel. That doesn't mean we can just sit there and relax that it's going to continue, and we're definitely very alert to that. But I think positive at the moment.
And I think, just picking up on Alex's point, perhaps that, I think what I've heard over the course of the 2 days is actually 2022 is going to be critical in how this all plays out. Is the incumbent going to be able to foreclose areas of the market and prevent altnets from investing, or and therefore the money that has been committed to by those altnet investors starts to diminish, or is that investment going to continue to grow, and actually we don't need to worry about the 85% target because hopefully we'll get to the 100% target? I think that's that's the critical message that that I've been hearing over the few days. There is a serious concern that there could be foreclosure by publishing plans, by tying in the big internet service providers with clever discounts of the incumbent, and that could actually then end up diminishing the amount of investment that's available for the altnets to put into the market. I guess that's one of the key concerns I've heard over the last few days. Again, I perhaps repeat some stuff we've already said, but any final thoughts on that before we go to the floor? And,
I think I would just reflect on what Dave was saying in terms of his role in Ofcom, the regulator, promoting competition and fair competition. I'm quite glad I'm not at the regulator, because what is fair and unfair competition in reality in the specifics is hard to really judge, and it's a complicated and difficult task for them. But I think they will promote fair competition. And I have confidence in the regulator that that's what they will be aiming to deliver.
Can I just maybe ask one more question? Is this one working? Yeah. So I think one of the things that we heard this morning, Henry, was pushback from Ofcom that actually there are areas where it might see that there's a problem, but it doesn't have comprehensive powers to fix that. Now, I know one of the things that is starting to be discussed across Whitehall is post-Brexit regulatory reform. If we could identify a handful of areas where actually Ofcom's current powers are deficient to support your objectives, do you think there's an opportunity or an opening to make the case to strengthen Ofcom's powers in some areas?
I feel a bit like a broken record. We're always really open, apart from the complaints that we consult too much, we're always open for government, for the industry, whatever part of the industry, to come and tell us how you think the sector could work better for delivering the objectives we have. We're pretty clear on, we're really unambiguous actually what our overarching targets for gigabit rollout are. We're pretty clear in terms of the broad shape of how we think we best get to those things. But if there's specific ways that, and good ideas that you have of how you think that could be best delivered, then come and talk to us, and we will certainly listen and think about them, as I like to think we've demonstrated in the past.
Great. Okay, look, I just want to then see, have we got any questions there from the floor? I can see gentleman just in front of us there, so just getting his cube. There we are.
Hello. Is that working? Yeah. So it's a question for Henry, and it's just on the issue of fair competition. So I'm Graham Sargent from Box Broadband. We're facing a bit of a challenge at the moment. We have gone through the process of building rural for the last 3 years and worked very closely with DCMS, and it's gone very well to a large extent, although there have been resource constraints on the DCMS side. We have submitted a number of PRPs which have been approved by DCMS and gone ahead and built under the rural grant scheme. We are now in the process of trying to connect the customers in those areas. However, we seem to be in the situation where Openreach have earmarked most of the country as commercial, and when we're applying for or trying to get grants for, applying for grants on behalf of the beneficiaries, we're being told they're not eligible. So we've spoken to your team quite a lot about this, and we've been told that there is a challenge process whereby postcodes can be challenged. They're in your DCMS Rurality Magi Checker, but they are not theoretically eligible now, even though we've invested, in building the rural network. So the problem we've got is we've been told to go through the challenge process. The challenge process isn't straightforward. You're under-resourced. We've been told that it might be many months before those postcodes are looked at. Meanwhile, Openreach seem to have achieved an objective, which is to stop us being able to connect our customers, because we can't connect the customers until we've gone through the approvals process for a particular customer to get a grant, or for us to claim a grant, should I say, on their behalf. So they're not eligible. We're trying to get the postcodes through. They're getting fed up. They're going and renewing their copper contracts. We can't get claim the grant on behalf of the beneficiary until that postcode has been approved, but it's just not happening. So we're just spinning at the moment. We've built the areas based on going through the PRP process because they're more expensive to build, and now we can't connect the customers. because they are now not eligible theoretically because Openreach might build that area sometime in the next 5 years. So it's killing us, really, and it's getting to the point where we're thinking, why are we bothering with rural?
And I guess, I mean, that's a reasonably detailed sort of process question. But I mean, it does seem completely counterintuitive that there are now these households that have fibre, but the customers can't be connected because of the voucher process, which does seem a bit bizarre.
So, like I say, I won't comment, partly because I'm not able to comment on the details of the kind of the situation you flagged. But very happy to put you in contact with the BDUK team that run the voucher program, which is not my team. I guess the underlying thing of what is driving some of these decisions, and I know there will be specific cases where it doesn't work, is we are trying to avoid spending and doing government subsidy in areas where there is commercial build. And as I touched on before, that makes our lives really complicated when we're trying to bring forward a lot of subsidised build. And it'd be much simpler for us not to run a voucher programme or run any of the procurements again until all the commercial build had rolled out till 24, 25, and we have a clearer picture. And so, this is where some of this comes up. I totally can hear you that actually on the ground this causes you problems. I'm very happy to put you in touch with the BDUK team and the specifics of the programme and the delays and the frustrations it's causing you.
Okay, I can see another. I can't really see people because of the lights on the stage, but I can see a blue box out there. I just can't see who's got it. So.
It's Aidan.
Oh, hi, Aidan.
Yeah, just a comment on Wayleaves. I undertook a study for CenturyLink that was now Lumen last year. The UK is the worst country in the world. If landlords, no, fun fact. If landlords in the States behaved the same way as they do here, they'd go to jail for the breach of the Sherman Act. In Spain, constructors or buildings are designated to particular contractors. If somebody wants to get in, they know who to go to for a block of buildings. The trouble with the reform is one of the effects of the new code with the so-called no network Wayleave fees is it's caused a huge amount of fury amongst London landlords who've seen their mobile income drop by 80%. So I sympathise with the whole business of reform, but we are the worst country in the world.
Any thoughts on how we might improve the landlord stuff? I know you're consulting on it at the moment.
So we're consulting on it, and we've made the changes to the code, and on the mobile side as well, because we recognise the importance of digital infrastructure getting rolled out, and and getting that balance between what is good for the many versus the interest of the few is one of the things that government does, right? And it's complicated, and there's a balancing act for that, and that's why we've consulted on code reform. We recognise the code and the Wayleaves doesn't work well, which is why we're looking to reform it. And like I say, we will hopefully be introducing the next round of legislation on this pretty soon. I think, when DCMS compares itself to other departments and the amount of legislative slots that we get for doing this stuff, we're actually doing pretty well, and we actually take up quite a lot of the legislative timetable for making these reforms. So yeah, it's something that we recognise, and it doesn't surprise me if you're finding that we're worse than almost every other country, if not every other country in the world on some of this stuff, because I speak to the sector on a daily basis, and I don't think there is, in fact, it's probably one of the things where there is almost uniform agreement across absolutely every operator that they would like Wayleaves to be improved, and it's something that we are, and probably the Streetworks regime as well, which is, something that the barrier busting task force in my team work on every day.
Good. All right, I think we're nearly up on time, but any other questions from the floor before I ask the panel just to give us their final thoughts? I don't think I can see any hands. Oh, there's one hand up just behind you, Malcolm.
Hi, Henry. It's Graham Oxby from Community Fibre. Earlier, Ofcom was saying they'd be reasonably content, I think, with sort of competition in the UK running at about 30% of homes passed with 3 or 4 options, the rest of 70% either one or both of Virgin and who are they called, Openreach. Would you be happy with that?
more is more, is our general position. And what steps that we can do to encourage more competition across more of the country, I think actually delivers the best outcomes for the consumers in terms of, and the resilience. The more networks is more resilience for consumers as well on those things. So it's a start. I think we see the evolution of more competition across more of the country. I think actually that is something, particularly where it's driven by lower costs of network deployment. That is something we'd like to see.
Great. Let's just go down the line and just any final thoughts from the panel. So I'll pass the mic down, Rob.
I mean, just to give Henry a bit of feedback on Ofcom, as I say, we are disappointed with Ofcom, but I think we now need to move on to that and think forward as to where we want Ofcom to be the next time it's making these major decisions. I think there's a couple of things. One, are we 100% sure as an industry that the changes to the appeal standard are driving good regulation? Does it make it so difficult to appeal Ofcom that it makes them complacent? And the second thing is, it's just too big. It needs a government review. It needs to be split up so that the board and the executive can properly look after such a complicated sector as telecoms. So, TV. It doesn't need to do TV. It is my point. It needs to be split up. So, let's think forward about what reforms we want to see to Ofcom the next time it's making such big decisions for our sector.
Just some last thoughts. We're building a lot of networks. The economic success of these networks will get customers to use them. So just reminding everyone in a way, state the obvious, but the consumer angle, getting the customers to actually consume the networks, getting customers to migrate from legacy networks onto these new fibre networks is quite key. So everything around helping the consumer make those choices, whether it's through easier switching, kind of better advertising and so on. I know there's a lot of work in that area, but I think that's a key thing. To once these networks are built, we're going to have to get them used and get them used quicker because it'll help them to get built. So,
thank you. I think it's important to keep the competitive market dynamic and also industry collaboration together, working to overcome those challenges, including labor skill shortage, including technological challenges for rural area. And Huawei think that ONETs should play a bigger role in the gigabit rollout, and we stand ready to support where we can.
There you go. I agree with everything they said, basically. I think, but I particularly agree with Rob. I mean, one just general comment I would make is it's very easy to fixate on these targets, and I think they've been super helpful in terms of, as I said in my preliminary remarks, they've been super helpful actually in energizing the sector and energizing the broader community that we're a part of. That's terrific. But ultimately what we're building here is long-term investments that play out over many, many years that require a great deal further incremental investment on top of the initial investment to build the network to make sure that, for instance, we can support smart city applications, 5G small cells, all the other stuff, the good stuff that flows from building it. So what I think my company and my investors require is short-term fixes for the problems that will stop us from hitting the targets, but also a long-term environment that they can be comfortable will support the investments that they want to make and will be fair. And at the moment, I think there are, for them, some significant question marks, particularly, as I've said, on the regulatory side.
Thanks, Alex. And I think, so if those investors do need reassurance from yourselves that actually this is still a dynamic market to be investing in, they should come and speak to you and come and speak to your team, and you'll provide them with the reassurances they need.
Very happy to have meetings with the sector and to discuss the issues that they want to raise with us, yeah.
Great. Okay, well, I think that draws this session to a close. Thank you to the panel, and thank you in particular to Henry for travelling up here today to speak to us all. So thank you very much. Go and enjoy your teas and coffees.